Hello and welcome to Think Tank. Today we are joined by Will Callaghan, one of the UK's leading authorities on transforming digital services in local government. And today we're going to be talking to Will about how AI and automation will transform public services in local government and improve, hopefully, citizens' lives. Well, welcome to Think Tank, Will Callaghan. How are you doing?
Paul.
Great to see you too. For our listeners, let's go back up a little bit and figure out your journey to how you got here. Many years ago, you worked for a GDS, Government Digital Services.
That's correct. Yeah. So about
3
12
years.
So I did 3 tours of duty at GDS.
Yeah, what did you do there?
There was a sort of informal gathering in a pub in Lambeth.
Yeah.
Trying to remember the name of the pub. That Tom Loosemore brokered with some interested parties, people like Neil Williams,
Right.
Dave Mann.
Yeah.
So I went along to that first thing. There were about 6 people in the room.
Okay.
And this was around the time of Martha's original letter.
Yeah, Martha Lane Fox.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I was part of that, but I was under contract for something else. So, you get on with it and I'll maybe try and join at a later date.
Yeah.
So my first gig there was a project called Whitehall. Okay. So these are the different apps that GDS runs. So Mainstream is, well, at the time, was all the kind of the sort of top 100 or top 50 transactions that we'll use every day.
Yeah.
Whitehall, which is the project I worked on, was all the departments.
Right.
So the Department of Business, Energy, Justice, all of those things.
Okay.
So I was a transition manager.
Okay.
Helping government departments move off their old sites onto the single domain.
Okay.
That was a lot of fun.
Right.
It was quite stressful.
Yeah.
It's part encouragement. It's part. There was a mandate from Francis Maud, so we had that kind of, if we needed it to sort of persuade people.
Yeah.
But it was a really interesting project, and I think on balance it really helped.
Yeah.
Certainly for citizens, one place to go.
Absolutely.
My second tour of duty was on Search and Browse. It's a product within the stack.
Yeah.
So I was an associate product manager, and I think it's the first time I've ever had the term product manager. I've been doing it prior to that, but
Right.
I don't think I've ever been called that before.
Yeah.
So, how can you do Google with 20 people, 25 people?
Yeah.
That was the ask. How do you make the search
Sure.
match those kind of expectations?
Yeah.
And then the browse patterns for people to kind of find their way around. On a single domain is complicated.
Yeah.
Lots of different needs you're trying to satisfy. And then my third gig, so it's turning into a very long description.
That's fine. Yeah.
Was something called a performance platform.
Okay.
So the platform play at GovUK was things like Verify, Pay, Forms now.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, what was Verify?
It was I think it was the government's sort of first go at, or certainly GDS's first go at sort of identity management.
Yeah.
So you create an account, but then you verify it with a third party like the post office or whatever that might be.
Right.
And it went pretty well, but it was a very difficult time to try and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Performance platform was another one of those things. So the idea was that, having sort of 4 KPIs. God, this is taking me back. So for 4 KPIs that carry across all services, like completion rates and user satisfaction, cost per transaction.
Right.
You have these things, and you can say, okay, well, how are we doing? And it was a really nice idea, and maybe a bit ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. So the platform, I was there about 12 months.
Yeah.
The platform sort of closed at some point. But it's interesting, the conversations coming back round to that. It's like, how do we measure? How do we compare? How do we sort of work out what best practice is and share that?
For sure.
So maybe that'll come back.
What was it like working there at the time?
Really enjoyed it. I think it's one of my best product experiences.
Yeah. How many people were in GDS around this time?
You tell me. Big place.
Yeah.
200 maybe.
Yeah.
That may be off, but the nice thing about it was that within your team, and the teams are sort of structured, sort of 10 to 15 people, you're autonomous for the most part.
Yeah.
So the Whitehall team, its job was to move departments to GovUK.
Yeah.
And we had a very broad sort of remit to do that. Mm-hmm. And Dev in the team, we could build what we needed to when we needed to. We could respond to user needs.
Yeah.
And in Neil Williams, who a lot of people know, is a very capable product manager.
Yeah.
So it's great to be part of a team like that.
Sure.
Same with search. Again, 15 to 20 people, you get on with it. And same with performance platform. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about it was, while you had that autonomy, there was alignment across the teams.
Yeah.
So I really understood, and it's something I still try to do now. It's how do you give people, plenty of scope to move, but help them move in tandem.
Yeah.
Is a very tricky thing to do.
Yeah.
And
sure.
and I picked that up and, still think about it, even now.
What? Yeah. On top of that, what do you take away? What's your biggest learning, do you think, from that period of time?
They got enormous amount of stuff right.
Yeah. What do you put that down to?
There was a very strong vision at the start. We need to fundamentally remake how this is done.
Yeah.
We need to. I think there was an admission that they didn't know all the answers, but they knew how to find those answers.
Yeah.
So we'll set up agile teams who can hypothesize and understand what they're trying to find out, and then act on what they find.
Yeah.
That iterative cycle that we all understand very naturally now.
Yeah.
I don't think it was done in government so much at that time. They maybe broke the mold.
Yeah.
I think that was all really smart.
At the time, it was like we're over 10 years ago we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So about 10 to 12 years
10
ago?
to 12 years ago, yeah.
And, I mean, it was fairly revolutionary for public sector at that point, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously the bigger departments kind of maybe were dabbling in this, but really at a centralized level, there wasn't really anything.
Well,
like this.
something that came straight from the Cabinet Office, that this is the way that we're going to try and build stuff out.
Yeah.
And then later, universal credit, there were sort of two goes at that. It was a bigger systems kind of approach, and then there was a separate approach that was very agile.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see which one won through in the end.
So in 2024, GDS has been announced that it's been moved into, I think, DSIT, away from Cabinet Office. What do you make of that move?
I think it...
I think DSIT is the Department for
Science, Innovation and Technology.
Yeah.
I'm not too fussed about where things live, provided they're joined.
Yeah.
I've worked in environments where, thinking more about my local government experience, but you have one team that's got the autonomy to do everything.
Yeah.
Or you could have 3 or 4 teams, but they actually, those folks get on and they have shared objectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's more about the objectives that they have than the structure that they're in.
Yeah.
But bringing it on under one Secretary of State, somebody like Peter Kyle, is obviously very capable and loves this stuff.
Yeah.
That's a big plus.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, brilliant. And you went from GDS onto local government. You did a kind of a long stint working with lots of local authorities, particularly down in the south of England.
Yeah.
Worthing, Brighton, Croydon. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
And what did you do with those councils?
So it was a change of sort of pace for me and my family. So we were in North London. My kids are 17 and 13. So my youngest was 3 when we moved out of London.
Yeah.
Down to the south coast.
Yeah.
And I did the commute for a while.
Yeah.
As everybody does. And I thought, oh God. Really,
on the trains again.
On the trains. Love the trains. And thought, actually,
I
can't do this. I need to think again. And at the same time, one thing I did take from GDS is sometimes you're a bit remote from the people, the challenges that you're trying to tackle.
Yeah.
So there was at the original GDS office in Holborn, there was a picture that was floating around. Somebody had sort of masked off an area of the window, and then and left a hole in the middle, and there was an arrow pointing through, say, users, and you could see down onto the street.
Right.
So there are the users.
Wow.
And
interesting.
You can see that. You can maybe try and Google this photo because it's around.
Okay.
And it's making the point that those are the people that we're working for.
Absolutely.
That those are who ultimately we're responsible for.
Yeah.
But they are down on the street, and I thought, well, actually, I want to go and talk with them.
Sure.
I want to ride on a bin lorry. I want to do this. I want to, which I did actually do.
Did you?
Yeah.
What did you, why? Okay, firstly, I mean, you wanted to be
understanding in the thick of it. Yeah.
And what did you make of being on a bin lorry?
It was cold and difficult, and tough, and people on the front line are asked to do often very tricky jobs,
of course,
and they're not necessarily supported to do those things.
And they're not always the nicest jobs, are they?
No, not the nicest jobs.
Yeah.
And I think it's whatever you can do as a kind of digital person.
Yeah.
To kind of empathise with that, support that.
What else did you do? Did you do anything else like that?
Sort of real world experience.
Yeah.
I was in.
Just to put yourself in the mindset of the user.
Something I didn't do, but maybe I should have done. So when I was working at Brighton, the way, this is another waste story.
Right.
So the outfit is called City Clean. It's like an independent part of Brighton Council, and in their canteen they have a Heartstopper breakfast, which I never ate. And I thought, actually, maybe I need to,
Yeah.
make,
Heartstopper.
you can picture what it was like.
Yeah.
But I didn't have one of those.
Yeah.
But I think the experience of doing that local gov stuff, which I still do, is, you can take a challenge and say, okay, well, we haven't got a lot of time and money, and we can't necessarily do like the full DDAT, separate roles for every role, everything that you're trying to do. You can actually, I'm thinking of the Brighton experience particularly. So we had some low code, we used low code there, and we got very good at using it.
Yeah.
So you can have conversations with users and stakeholders.
Yeah.
Get an idea and iterate on it that day.
Yeah.
Put something in front of somebody, go and see those people. I built a community grants app with some stakeholders. We went and met them all.
Right.
And have a go at this. Tell us what you think. Tomorrow we've got, because of the low code tech we were using, we had an iteration of that the next day. And that's a really nice, sort of rinse and repeat thing. You can make a massive difference really
as well,
quickly.
Right?
Yeah.
How to what extent were you able to talk to other sort of folks in technology across the nation when you're working in a place like Brighton or Croydon, or is it very much we're trying to solve things individually for our citizens?
I mean, we'll probably get onto the local Gov Drupal stuff where I've been able to do that.
Yeah.
I think take that step to one side.
Yeah.
If you think about an unrelated challenge, we didn't. Well, every council we've worked on, I've worked in, has very much thought about these challenges being their own. They're not necessarily them being unique, but the time that we've got and the scope that we've got to do this thing, we basically need to crack it on our own.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame.
Yeah.
There's not the time, the headspace, the support, the encouragement to actually say, probably somebody else has got this experience, and maybe we should.
Yeah,
let's go and have another.
Happened before, right? Surely.
Too right. Absolutely, it would have done.
Yeah.
I remember very early in the local Gov Drupal days, which we'll get onto. So I was a delivery manager at Croydon, and I got the product people at Brighton and Croydon, where I was working together.
Yeah.
In Croydon Towers in the cafe, so beautiful views if you ever go.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I'm just going to leave these guys to it. I'm going to listen. And they had a conversation. I mean, lovely folks, I'm still in touch with, and they were talking about their needs, and it was very much, well, that I've got that need.
Yeah.
I haven't got time to do that need, so could you do that need, and then I can get the benefit of your experience, and I'll do this instead.
Yeah.
And it became very obvious very quickly that the stuff they were talking about was the same for the most part.
Yeah.
There's sovereignty in local authorities for sure.
Sure.
But the basic needs are very similar.
Yeah.
You do that, I'll do this, we'll share.
Yeah. And in fact, actually, that's a little bit of, I mean, when we first met a few years back, that's kind of the story that I believe you told me about when you went to Croydon. You kind of went, well, we've got the similar sort of challenges that Brighton had.
Yeah.
Why don't we just kind of,
use them.
Yeah. What was that all about? When was the beginning of your founding Local Gov Drupal and that thought process?
So, I was working at Brighton on a big transformation project, and part of that was a new website.
Yeah.
And they love Drupal.
Yeah.
We love Drupal.
Yeah.
I think they were on Drupal 8, so they've been building for a long time. And the scope was basically take down old Drupal 7, replace with Drupal 8, which we did.
Yeah.
We had a very small but very good team. There was a firm, Drupal fans will know, there used to be a firm called Miggle.
Yeah.
There was a guy called Alec Miggle, who's a lovely guy. He was like our developer. We had some user researchers and content people.
Yeah.
And it was get this stuff done really quickly.
Yeah.
Which we did. And Alec all the while was saying we just need to open source this. Let's just open source this.
Yeah.
Which I remember from my Gov UK days, but it sort of didn't click first time with me.
Yeah.
So it's very much him saying, let's do this. Got support from my bosses at Brighton. So we sort of put this stuff out there.
Yeah.
And then that contract sort of naturally came to an end. We delivered the things that we wanted to do. And then I moved to Croydon to do a very similar job. Let's do transformation. Let's think about user needs. Let's set up a team.
Yeah.
Which became the Croydon Digital Service under Neil Williams again.
Yeah.
And the first ask was, let's build a Drupal website.
Yeah.
To which I thought, oh, okay.
Hang on a second, I've done that.
I've kind of done that already. So my first thought was, well, do we really need to start from scratch and pick these basic needs?
Sure.
or could we leave as something that had already existed?
Yeah.
And it was quite a long conversation between the two councils, and concerns on some things.
Yeah.
How do we do this together? We were potentially going off in two different directions.
Sure.
How do we actually do that? But it really worked, and the only governance around it was a handshake. There wasn't it wasn't a terms of reference.
Right.
We give you this, you give us that. It's like, actually, let's just stay in touch.
What were the initial concerns, if you don't mind me asking?
So, I think there was, we've spent money on this and you've not.
Yeah.
Which is fair.
How do we recoup our investment?
How do we? Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have just sold this, but then it's open source, so really, should we do that?
Yeah.
What about the time constraints? Around. We've got our roadmap. We've got our individual roadmaps that we need to deliver over time. That's going to take time.
Yeah.
And surely collaboration takes longer.
Yeah.
Which it does. But if you do it well, you potentially only have to do a third or, half, 2/3 of the work you were going to do. So that's the difference. You spend more time talking, but ultimately you've got two teams to deliver the same stuff. So
yeah.
it's trying to get through all of that kind of, it's nervousness, I guess.
Sure. And when did you know you were kind of onto a winner here with LocalGov Drupal? When did LocalGov Drupal actually become a thing?
When did it become a thing? Probably two separate instances. So I'm a big believer in open source things become useful when more than one person uses it.
Yeah.
So it's that joining of a second party.
Yeah.
So Croydon came along and went, we actually like this and we're going to support it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, it's when somebody's in a room going, let's do a thing, and the first person to put their hand up goes, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
It's that kind of moment.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important.
Yeah.
I guess maybe that's an informal thing. The formal part was, at the time, there was something called the Local Digital Fund that was run by, it's called MHCLG now, but it's had different acronyms in the past.
MHLG.
So it was the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So it's a UK government department.
Yeah.
It's been called Levelling Up and other things.
Yeah.
But that's what it's called now. They had this. I think it's a genius idea to say, we invite public sector bodies to sign something called the Local Digital Declaration.
Okay. And what is that?
It's a short statement to say, well, we're into open source, we're into collaboration, co-funding, sharing our learnings, working in the open, those kinds of things. It's a really good short document that brighter minds than me got in a room and wrote, and it's like, this is great. This is a good foundational document.
This is kind of a rules of working.
For sure.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about it is if you signed this, if you pledged to follow these guidelines, there was money, possibly.
Right.
You could apply for money to government.
Yeah.
And that's where the Local Digital Fund came in.
Yeah, okay.
And it ran, it's not running now, it's maybe 5 or 6 rounds. People can go Google it.
Yeah.
We applied
Right.
as Croydon.
Okay.
We've got a collaborative project already. We've got 2 councils. We've
Yeah.
got the start of something.
Yeah.
And we won money over several rounds, sort of 4 or 5 rounds,
Right.
which built LocalGov Drupal up to what it is today.
Fantastic.
So it's 50 councils.
50 councils are using it today. And
Which
for
is
those who
great.
don't know, LocalGov Drupal is exactly what? How would you describe it?
Well, Drupal, probably everybody knows, is a open source sort of publishing form building platform,
Yeah.
which is, it's incredible.
Global,
global,
open source.
absolutely.
Been used for 20 plus years,
Yeah.
a lot by public sector around the world, the US, the UK,
Yeah.
everywhere else.
Which I'd only done Drupal once before I'd started this.
Right.
So that the entry to that community was like, wow.
Ginormous.
It really is.
Yeah.
So that was a real eye opener, and I'm still amazed by the sharing that goes on even today.
Yeah.
But just on LocalGov Drupal, so you have these. The term is distribution. It's a collection of whatever core version of Drupal there is, so 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And core contributed modules that the community makes.
Yeah.
And then whatever special source that you make that you might contribute back, you wrap this up in a parcel called a distribution, and that's the thing that you serve.
Yeah.
And distributions, there's a few. We've got very good company in the publishing space, and ours is aimed at principally UK and Irish local gov.
Yeah.
But increasingly, it's becoming seen that these needs are shared by other parts of the public sector, but the NHS, fire service, education.
Yeah.
There's a lot of commonality between these things. So that's the kind of move that we're starting to see, and may well happen.
And you said 50 councils are now using LocalGov Drupal, and that doesn't even include all the other councils who are doing their own versions of Drupal as well. So as a consequence, Drupal is now the number one CMS for local government, isn't it?
That's true. So there's a really good guy called Colin Stenning who worked at Bracknell Forest Council, and he loves doing research and publishing league tables and this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And he does a sort of annual or twice yearly survey of where what's the usage of CMS sort of products in local government. And Drupal for a long time was number 2.
Yeah.
And then I won't say who it leapfrogged, but it leapfrogged up to the top spot.
Yeah.
And we're like, wow, this is the the most common thing in local government is an open source product.
Yeah.
That's really
pretty
something.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, I've known Colin for a number of years. He's a lovely guy, isn't he?
Yeah,
and, it's interesting his research.
Yeah.
He's been a big Drupal fan for a number of years as well.
Yeah.
Not just him, but Bracknell Forest, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So how does LocalGov Drupal help shift contacts by citizens to sort of online from either phone or email? Can it?
I think the channel shift argument is slightly bogus.
How do you mean?
So how do you run good responsive customer service? I think so. You take a step back from that, and you say, actually, what I'm trying to help a citizen do a thing, and I need to be aware of the channels that they're all using. So, sort of frequent flyers like me, we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
I want to in and out online. Great.
Yeah.
So I want fast, efficient services.
In fact, you don't even want to hassle the
not really
the council.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure there's lots of great transactions that we could talk about. But I want frictionless transactions. That's great.
Yeah.
And I think when channel shift strategies are made, they're thinking about people like me.
Yeah.
But I'm not the only type of person using this.
No, of course.
So you've got people who are digitally poor. They don't have access to any of the kit that we have.
Yeah.
So what channels should they be using? You've got people who maybe speak in a different language. So how do we deal with that? Or people with accessibility needs, how do we help them?
Yeah.
So I think just saying magic bullet, install Drupal, job done, is only part of the answer.
Yeah.
So we're a big advocate of sort of responsive teams. So bring more skills in house.
Yeah.
While making sure that you've got a really good agency network to buy in those skills and supplement what you already have.
Yeah.
So have skills on tap wherever they are.
Right.
And then have the tool set to be responsive to whatever comes down the track.
Yeah.
So sort of shorter contract lengths, more skills at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And you see councils that do this really well. I think you're doing some work with Woking. I think that's the strategy.
Yeah.
Brighton and Croydon, it was very much, let's try and bring this closer to us so we've got more. It's ownership, I guess, but just more control over what we're able to do day to day. And I think that strategy was really borne out in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Where you're asking local government to sort of turn around apps on a dime.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm big fans of Cumberland. I'll probably talk about them again. So formerly Cumbria Council.
Right.
So they had good, good low code, good. They were Drupal users. They helped us found LocalGov Drupal.
Right.
So when the pandemic came along, we're first to the market with an app that will basically do grant giving.
Yeah.
It was a few days. Not having to strike any new contracts. Not having to learn any new skills, because basically we can just do it. I think I will get back to your question in a second, but how can a set of technology and skills help deliver better customer services is how I would play it.
Yeah.
So what's in your call center, how are you doing face to face, and how is Drupal content design, service design, and those other things? How is it part of that mix?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I would advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. How does the team at LGD think about user experience, user research, that kind of thing? How does that fit into the sort of development of the product roadmap?
Well, I think we'd need a bigger budget. Really, we run quite a sort of lean ship. So I'd like to do more. I can't do everything that I want to do.
Yeah.
But I hope that we are learning from best practice. So we're blessed by having Gov UK here and the design system that does a lot of this heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
That we should be taking advantage of. that we're able to prototype those kind of things and test them locally.
Yeah.
You know, so we're trying this thing out. Does it work? Does it work in a slightly different context? I think also we've got the network of councils, and we're very much encouraging them and their suppliers to not necessarily look at things we've already looked at, but try and think about new challenges, new things that we don't really understand, and focus their research there and share that research.
Yeah.
And also I think it's that skill of being able to ship really early and often. So, you know, I think there's no such thing as perfect, frankly.
Yeah.
So let's get the thing out the door and understand,
Absolutely.
you know, better what the challenges are.
Better to get something out.
Get
People using it, learn from those. Challenges
So I
and
think
mistakes.
it's a mix of those strategies.
Yeah.
And what the thing I think I'm missing, we've definitely talked about this before, is a little bit more formal user research wouldn't go amiss in the work that we do.
Yeah.
But we are a co-op with quite a low budget.
Yeah. Of
So,
course.
you know, as that increases, that's the direction I think.
Yeah.
It's like, let's keep all this really fast.
Is that the kind of thing that the ministry should actually maybe perhaps support?
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got more than 50 councils using this, then actually maybe there should be slightly more money thrown at it, I guess.
It's interesting that we've had, at the time of founding, so the co-op that runs LocalGov Drupal now, we're coming into our third year in January. And at the time of founding this, we had lots of conversations with people about the model. Where's money coming from?
Yeah.
You know, what are we spending this money on? We had quite a few conversations with people trying to do the same thing in the States.
Yeah.
And their view was, you know, hang on, shouldn't the federal government be paying for some of this? Because there's a stake. You know, the government has a stake in making these things work.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you know, there's money that should be attached to that.
Yeah.
And at the time, we were coming to the end of our government funding.
Yeah.
Let's see with a new government.
Yeah.
Let's see. And the conversations they're having around the digital centre,
Yeah.
you know, does it lead to more funding for collaborative projects of this kind? I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do hope so.
Speaking of new challenges, you launched something new in 2024. Was it the open digital planning?
Oh, not me launching, me joining.
Joining.
Me joining.
You're the what do you do there?
I am the commercial strategy lead.
Okay.
Which sounds very
And
grand.
what is open digital planning then?
So it's a project it actually came out of the Local Digital Fund, the same place as LocalGov Drupal.
Okay.
So around the time we were doing our work,
Yeah.
sort of when would that be? Sort of pandemic time.
Yeah.
Other councils were submitting ideas for, you know, for their own projects.
Right.
And there were I think two or three projects that other councils submitted. One was sort of this is all in the planning reform space.
Okay.
So planning applications for buildings.
Right. And the residential, commercial, both?
Bit of both,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
So there's sort of front end application process for citizens that had an acronym, which I won't. I'll spare you. And then a back office process for planning officers.
Right.
Called BOPS, Back Office Planning System.
Right.
It's a great acronym. And then that was subsequently joined by a couple of other projects. A thing for site notices. So, you know, you walk past a big building site and you see a notice. It's a site notice. But what's the digital one?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
And then a register for all planning applications and decisions.
Okay.
So these projects are already in flight. And the government...
When did this get created? The open digital planning initiative?
Do you know, I'm awful at date. But 2020?
Okay.
Kind
So
of.
COVID.
Yeah. Sort of 3-4 years old.
Yeah.
And what the government did was bring this stuff together in one place called Open Digital Planning.
Gotcha.
Kind of
Okay.
formalise it and actually say, you know, these products are the start of something more.
Yeah.
You know, so then the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act came along that talked in the previous government.
Yeah.
That talked about turbocharging the planning system, building more houses, you know, the things the country needs.
Yeah.
And the new government has very much doubled down on that. We need to build more 1.5 million homes and so on. So the government sees this project as very much part of that solution.
Right.
So there's lots of things they can do in the planning reform space, but one
Okay.
of those is software, and that's what this team does.
Excellent. And so what is the software behind it? What's in the stack, if you don't mind me asking?
So the things that I talked about. So the stack is now 4 products. So Plan X is citizen-facing.
Yeah. So
applications.
sorry, I meant more is it open source or is it
It's open source.
Right.
Yeah, you can go and download all of this, and as a council or as a you know,
somewhere on GitHub or somewhere?
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you Google Open Digital Planning, it will take you to all the documentation about
Right.
this. So those products, and that's one part of the strategy is let's support councils or
Yeah.
planning authorities to build exemplar products.
Okay.
It's very much like Drupal, you know, same
Yeah.
sort of thing.
And every council needs this, I guess.
Every planning authority.
Every planning authority.
So
Okay.
coming
How
from
many planning authorities are there?
there are more than councils. So coming from council land, this is a thing that I have to do.
Okay.
So my week is half. I spend half my week with LocalGov Drupal and half with Open Digital Planning, and I go from councils here to planning authorities here, and they're not necessarily the same.
Right.
So most councils are planning authorities.
Right.
You know, they have a statutory responsibility for these things.
Yeah.
But there are other planning authorities like national parks.
Okay.
So there are other bodies that
Sure.
could be planning authorities as well.
Right, yeah.
So there are, I can never remember the numbers, 300 odd planning authorities, about
Okay.
the same number of councils.
Right.
And, you know, for them, what's the strategy? So build software that helps, that they could adopt.
Yeah.
Work with the market. This is different from LocalGov Drupal, and one of the reasons why I wanted to move in this direction.
Yeah.
So how do we work with the market? It's a very established, big market with lots of sort of established players in it. How do you work with them to move this
Yeah.
to a place where planning applications happen more regularly, more often?
Yeah.
They're more predictable.
Yeah.
You know, how do you help them do that?
Yeah.
How do you support planning officers and developers and so on to do that? There's legislation. So the Levelling Up Regeneration Act, the LURA, the acronym, talks about modern planning software, accredited planning software,
Right.
about data standards.
Yeah.
So there's work that's going on there. And the idea is that these things join up and you know, you have in the future a more data-driven planning system with more modern software. You know, the definition of modern is it's still being worked through,
Right.
but there's a lot of good conversations going on. With
Yeah.
more modern software available from a range of suppliers, more choice for local planning authorities.
Yeah.
And that's the contribution that this team is making to that 1.5 million homes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It is.
Very cool.
There's a lot to it.
What other kind of either systems or applications within local government do you see need to be completely overhauled and modernized, either with open source technology or perhaps automation or standardization? Let's put it that way.
I think there's a kind of, I'll use co-op's model as a shorthand.
Yeah.
So the model that LocalGov Drupal has been able to pioneer. So it's saying, actually, the users of this technology can band together
Yeah.
and think about common needs.
Yeah.
So it's not 20 people building 20 different variations of the same thing.
Yeah.
It's actually 20 people gathering together and building one thing and allowing slight variations within it. So I think that model really works. I think the funding of it is really interesting. So we're not spending this money necessarily 20 times. We're spending slightly lower on one thing. And in some cases, it's not about reducing the spend. It's actually about moving spend to different things.
Yeah.
So we're not spending money on the stack. We're spending it on research instead, or content design,
Yeah.
or service design.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's spending it on the things that we really need to spend it on.
What are the key services that they're pretty standard across
I'll
councils and
come
local authorities?
to that. I mean, I think the only other thing is, you know, it's sort of collaboration, co-funding, and then trying to identify how this model would work.
Right.
So coming back to where I was a couple of minutes ago, it's basically saying where would this kind of co-op model work in different areas of the local software landscape, and I think it's worth a shot in more areas.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about the local digital fund and where it's that I mentioned the CLG fund, where it succeeded and failed.
Right.
And I think it was on the right lines in a lot of ways. It was a decent amount of money
Yeah.
over reasonably long term, so it gives you lots of opportunity to actually embed better practice.
Yeah.
It's open to anyone to apply. We're all working on problems that need to be solved. I think the only thing that really didn't work is there were too many of these things. And actually, if you could to answer your question, if you could be a bit more strategic and
Yeah.
identify 5 or 6 different areas,
Yeah.
you would get a lot further. So I think planning is one.
Okay.
Open digital planning is doing that. What are we doing in social care? What are we doing in sort of transport, highways? That's those sorts of areas.
Yeah.
What are we doing in education? What are those systems?
Yeah.
Parking. You know, what are the solutions? And I think a mix of, and in the health space as well, which the Prime Minister's been talking about, we want apps that basically have all your data and so on. That's going to take a lot of coordination.
Sure.
Maybe a bit of legislation. Certainly, people collaborating.
Yeah.
Sounds like what I've been talking about.
Absolutely. And interesting, 4 of those at least are part of a movement of services that could be devolved, in fact, thinking about devolution, the potential England devolution bill that may get passed next year. Are you a fan of devolution, and how does devolution fit with this story?
I'm definitely a fan of devolution.
Yeah.
And I think where you look at the success of the mayors to do this job.
Yeah.
So, bringing the buses back into public ownership, that's the one that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And a mayor, you would hope, has an idea of the needs of their place.
Yeah.
And can respond more effectively to that and bring councils and other bodies together in a room to talk about shared challenges.
Yeah.
So I think that's got to be the way that we go. There's a question about how that happens when you haven't got a mayor. That's one of the big stumbling blocks with this.
For sure.
So in the area where I live, in East Sussex, we have a 2-tier authority.
Yeah.
And there are lots of authorities next to each other, and there's no coordination across that set.
So what do you need then, from a structural standpoint, either structural or?
I think we need a mayor, or something like that.
Right.
It's like in the absence of that. So areas can choose to have them, and for whatever reason, our area has chosen not to have one.
Right.
That's fine. That's their choice.
Sure.
But it's how does this work? How does Devo work when you haven't got that kind of coordination? And I think that's while I'm in. I do work in government. I'm not privy to this conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they're working through that. It's like this works for mayors, great.
Yeah.
How does it work elsewhere?
And if we use Manchester as an example, where Andy Burnham is probably the sort of the best example of where this has worked over the last few years.
Or in London or Birmingham.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What are the lessons in terms of how we look at devolution and digital transformation?
Yeah.
So with your GDS experience and your local gov experience, where would you advise in a world that is potentially devolved that we, I guess, invest in the structures or the strategies for those devolved powers to basically do things in a consistent way?
There are examples of this. So I was at an event in Manchester where somebody from the Greater Manchester Authority digital team stood on a stage and reeled off a dozen projects that they were doing, all of which were amazing.
Right.
And the conversation was about, well, this wouldn't be possible if this organisation and the coordination didn't exist.
Yeah.
Can't think of an individual project off the top of my head.
Sure.
But I said to the speaker afterwards, so does everybody agree with all of this? And he said, well, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But we're after common. It's the same as my LocalGov Drupal job. It's common needs.
Yeah.
What can we can't work together on everything, but what can we get consent for?
Yeah.
Let's work on those things.
And to me, the issue, I guess, it becomes one of like, how do you get that person to be able to share?
Yeah.
You're going back to your Brighton Croydon conversations where you're kind of going, well, how do we share that knowledge? How do we share those, in fact, applications if they could be shared?
Yeah. I think it's interesting that there's a lot of talk about. So in London, there's a London Office of Technology, which I'm a massive fan of.
Right.
So they don't necessarily build software, but they do coordinate action between the boroughs.
Right.
And most of the boroughs, I think it's a couple that are not members, most of them are members.
Yeah.
Because they've all seen that actually there are hard challenges that individually they can't solve, and actually getting together and paying not very much money into a pot allows them to do an enormous amount of good.
Yeah.
And I think those organisations are almost like the precursor to what I hope is coming next.
What do you think that councils need to get in order before they can take advantage of shared technologies, be it AI, automation, basic digital transformation? What do they need to do in terms of getting their own houses in order to be able to take advantage of?
I think first you need to see this as an important thing.
Yeah.
So you need leaders in those organisations that understand that you don't necessarily have to do everything.
Yeah.
That probably somebody else has covered the same ground as you, and you do your bit. You share what you have and expect to receive from others.
Yeah.
If we all had that mindset, this would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
But it's still quite patchy. So I think it's one, it's an understanding and a willingness.
Yeah.
And you do see it. Leaders put their hand up and go, I wish I could share this with somebody, and then there's silence, or not very much happens.
Yeah.
So a bit more of a push to make that happen.
Who needs to do the pushing?
Well, I think you know, it can come from within the sector itself to a large extent. So LocalGov Drupal came from the sector. It's me and other people saying, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Who wants to join? And making a vehicle that it rolls like a train. It's very easy to get on. Or like the cable car at the Emirates cable car in Greenwich. This is a moving thing, and it's very easy to join. Having structures of that kind.
Right.
I think also the headspace and time in individual organisations to be able to go and explore this.
Yeah.
So if and I've been in this seat myself, if you're a web manager or a product manager in a local authority, you have a never-ending sort of stream of work.
Yeah. And
it's very demotivating. It's very difficult to get out from under that.
Yeah.
And do something else.
Yeah.
So freeing up that time, sort of 10% time, like I don't know if Google still does that.
Yeah.
But free time to go and explore.
Sure.
And at LocalGov Drupal, we're very conscious that people don't have that time.
Mm-hmm.
So we run something called LocalGov Drupal Week. Mm-hmm. It's not a physical event. It's a lunchtime, 5 lunchtimes, because you haven't got time.
Yeah.
It's very much designed for that.
And you just had one in November, wasn't it? Yeah.
Just making it as easy as possible to say, I've got an inclination, I want to join, and I can actually get something out of this. I can get a lot of value really quickly. Yeah. But more time and more space for that would make a massive difference.
Absolutely.
I think that, in terms of data, that in sort of data sharing, or rather, so there's a book called Platform Land by Richard Pope. He actually talks about, data sharing is the wrong thing. It's the wrong term. It's actually data access is what we should be talking about.
Yeah.
So here's my data. I made a copy of it and I've given it to you.
Yeah.
It's not the right thing to do because you've got a copy and now I've got a copy.
Yeah.
No, let's not do that. It's like, here's my canonical data that I am a guardian of.
That's right.
And I'll give you access to this data, and there you go. So those kind of attitudes within local government, I think, would really help.
Funnily, you mentioned him. I was going to talk to you about this book because we were talking earlier about it. Many people in our business have read his book, just released a few months back. The data access point I was going to talk to you about. That's really interesting. And the other one that I was going to raise was that making data auditable.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you the idea that basically it's such an important concept within technology.
Yeah.
Do you think that at local government level data is taken seriously? I mean, obviously, if you asked a CDO of a local council, they're going to say, of course, of course we take data seriously. But I guess I mean in terms of seriousness with regards to the potential of like the issue of data access and data control and security of data as well.
Yeah, I think with all of this, while I've not worked on it, I wouldn't call myself a sort of big data expert. I use it, I'm into it. Yeah. And I think there are better people that could come in and talk about this.
Sure.
But I'm very interested in the practical applications of things. So if you can show practically how an approach is worth doing, then people will make time for it. Yeah. So there was another local digital project called Open Referral, which I'm a big fan of. Okay. And it's about a data standard for kind of community support organisations and services. So I'm trying to think of a good example. So my digital drop-in is listed and it's described in a particular way, and I can tell you when the events are. That means I can share it with you and you can publish. And we can keep this data up to date together. Yeah. Because stewardship of this is a problem. It's used in the UK and it's a very robust standard, but it hasn't kind of lifted off in the way I think it really should. Yeah. And it's practical examples, I think, for me, are the thing that are missing. Yeah. Because as somebody this is aimed at local government principally. Mm-hmm. As a local government officer, I haven't got time to do this thing that I really want to do, which is this standard. Yeah. I have to do all these other things that I've been made to do or have to do. Yeah. So it's showing the value and making time to explore that value, I think, is the big challenge. Yeah. So standards, yes, absolutely, but actually the time to use them is the thing that a lot of people, I think, miss. Yeah. Making more time for it.
I have a view that data is actually so important that it really shouldn't be left to local governments necessarily to actually control, unless there is something very specific in terms of that data access issue that when I consume something or transact with something at a local level, then maybe the transaction details stay at a local level. But so much of our data world is actually, it's so important that I'm not really sure that it kind of sits at a local level. I think it's almost like a national level. I met the chief data officer for the government few months back.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to him about this very question, like just even from a central government standpoint, forget local government for a second, at a central government standpoint, how do you share data across the large central government departments?
Yeah.
Because they've got the same challenges there at the central government level.
Yeah. I think it's about standards and behaviours, and then it doesn't necessarily matter where this sits. I think it comes back to I think you were saying where should DSIT sit? Where does GovUK sit? It's more about how you behave and how you interact is something I'm really interested in.
And establishing the guardian for that data, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So I think there are, if we saw a bit more of this kind of behaviour and use of data, then I think we would see more. I think you've got to have examples and then, show best practice and encourage that to be used, and then we'll get more adoption. We've got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, let's talk about AI and automation.
Sure.
Okay, so we've just seen the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT. I actually think that the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT is a bit of a watershed moment for us. The first year was kind of like, oh my goodness, everyone's scrambling around trying to figure it out. Second year, there seems to be a huge amount of activity. Obviously, artificial intelligence has been around for a number of years, but in terms of it kind of capturing the public imagination, I think when we started to see large language models come into sort of the public domain, they kind of really got us because we're talking about artificial intelligence that kind of directly uses human language to communicate rather than sort of, number crunching or, data crunching, that kind of thing. So do you see local governments, first off, do you see local governments able to take advantage of artificial intelligence in the year ahead?
No, I don't, because I'm a bit of a traditionalist, actually.
Yeah.
For a long time, I thought actually this sort of AI stuff, I was a bit bar humbug about the whole thing.
Right.
And I don't think this is really helping. Blah blah blah. There's a product guy called Matt Duke, so I follow, and I saw a post of his on LinkedIn going, bar humbug, I'm not interested. But actually, I'm having a bit of a moment, and maybe I am interested.
So what was your moment?
It was a very similar journey. I thought, well, actually, as a product manager, or product lead, how do I use this in my day-to-day work? And I was thinking, okay, well, I can use this to do deep research into particular things. I can ask Perplexity, which is my favourite one. I can ask that a question, and it can give me information. I had to do a talk on how to get into the digital industry.
Okay.
I know how to become a user researcher, kind of, and all these different things. But actually, it takes a long time to synthesize that information.
Sure.
Which an AI can do for you. So there were a few things that I was trying and doing. And I thought, actually, there's something in this. Also, my 17-year-old son is coming up to sort of A-level time, and submissions.
Has he stopped asking you for help?
No, that's
going to ChatGPT.
Well, that's a long question, and I've got a long answer to which I'll spare you. But it's interesting their college's attitude to AI.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people filing AI submissions, which they use AI to spot. So there's a bit of an arms race going on here.
Yeah.
Back to your question about public sector, I think, it needs good content to learn from in order to do its job.
Yeah.
So I'd advocate something that's been advocated for a long time is content design.
Yeah.
So when I was working at GovUK, that's where this term, I guess, was sort of founded. And it was based on what are user needs and how do you write for those, and how do you prioritize user needs based on what people are trying to do.
Yeah.
And if we did more of that, if local government did more of that, then AI would have a massive, you're creating a foundation that you could get a massive benefit from with AI.
Yeah.
But I think what I've seen in some places is let's buy the shiny thing that will fix all the stuff that's broken, and it won't really get the benefit that people think it will. So I think it's almost like, yes, do it, but take a step back. And there was a very boring hashtag. Well, it wasn't boring, but I think people think it's boring now. There's a hashtag fix the plumbing,
right,
that went round for a long time, and I think we need to fix some of the plumbing, fix it, and then use AI and other modern technologies with it to
Yeah.
get the benefit. So yeah, it sounds a bit boring, but
Not at all.
I think we need to do some of that.
Well, a lot of councils have actually been using something called robotic process automation,
Sure.
so RPAs,
Sure.
for a number of years. So automation, I would argue, is kind of a precursor to this. And 2025, 26, really going to be known as the years of agents, AI agents.
Yeah.
To me, that's just simply the evolution of automations like RPAs. Have you got experience of RPAs and how automations can improve
A
backlogs?
little.
And
And for the last few years, I've been very much in the LocalGov Drupal world,
Yeah.
which doesn't. It's related, but it's not the same.
yeah,
What I have seen is some of our councils start to use it.
yeah,
So I mentioned Cumberland earlier. Back to Cumberland again, who use it a lot. So from time to time, we've been able to catch up and talk about this stuff. And what I sense from them is that there's a couple of places where automation really works.
yeah,
So is there a manual process that's very clear that doesn't need to be done by a human being?
Yeah.
Actually, we could just automate that.
yeah,
And/or are the legacy technologies that don't talk but they really should, and can RPA fill those gaps? And in those couple of use cases, it's been huge.
yeah,
It's made a massive difference. And actually, it's not very hard to get started. The stuff doesn't need a lot of support. You can actually, what they were saying to me is you can set it up and run with hardly any support at all.
for sure.
And actually save a lot of time, trees, printing things out,
Yeah.
all of the good things that we want to do. So I think there's absolutely a space for it. One thing I was thinking is if we had better state data standards and APIs, that's one of the things that RPA is being used to fix. So would that reduce the need for that particular use of RPA? Maybe it would come in a different place, but that hasn't happened yet. So whatever technologies are going to benefit us and save time and money, I'm all for.
Yeah,
And again, it's what are the real world practical applications? Let's read about those. Let's really understand those.
yeah.
And see how they work for us.
We were talking about devolution, and I see these two worlds colliding: devolution and artificial intelligence in public sector. How would you devolve AI?
Oh my. I don't know.
Or would you? So we were talking about the content guidelines, for instance.
Sure.
Would do the content guidelines get centralized? In a even in a devolved sense.
I think there's so going down to a local council level, they haven't necessarily got the time or all the expertise they need to do all of this thinking.
Yeah.
And also, should they have to?
Should they? Yeah, exactly.
So I think I think it's the Institute of AI is part of DCID. IAI is part of DCID.
Yeah.
So what I'd expect from them is, in the same way as GDS does, is to work through a lot of these challenges in this context and say, okay, we've done some of the thinking for you, and we think these are standards that you could adopt, or ways of working, or whatever it might be. So I think a lot of that could be inherited, or certainly put there as an example of what could be used.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a starting point, and then, if a local council or planning authority or whoever has a bit more headspace to be part of the conversation, be part of the collaboration.
Yeah.
So if you're running around like a headless chicken trying to do all these 20 things today, you can't ever look up and see what's being developed and make the best use of that.
Yeah.
So actually, 80% of the work, lose 20% of your backlog I think is the thing that you should do.
Yeah, brilliant.
And have that time to say, okay, here's some standards that GDS did. Here's something that DCIT did. Oh, we're just going to use those because we're not precious. We think this is good enough. An appreciation of what's good enough as well.
Yeah.
I think doesn't always come through in organisations like this. So good enough is a thing that's perfect, that we think is perfect.
Yeah.
That we spent a lot of time on, that we sweated over.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What extra value did that give you over the thing that you just saw GDS did, that you took half a day looking at, reviewing, and then probably using? And you can ship that today. This thing's going to take 6 months. So I think there's more of that. I will go on a rant about this. So it's I think it's how do you know when to know when to work on something, know when to use something, know when to collaborate on
Right.
something.
Yeah.
So having a better understanding of that would I think free up time to think more about this as an individual council.
And what's the risk? How do councils? What are the risks that councils might get left behind in this world? Because we've seen it before.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I think it's different. It's different attitudes to this make the biggest difference, and leadership around this make the biggest difference. So in the sort of local Drupal space, I mean, I could say we're one of the leaders in this space. There are other software is available, that's good software.
Yeah.
But I think we do a pretty good job. 50 out of 300 odd use LocalGov Drupal. And there's a lot more that are interested,
Yeah.
but they're not using it right now. So they're not getting the benefit of, say they're on Drupal, they're not getting the benefit of a free upgrade from Drupal 10 to 11. We do.
Yeah.
Or all the thinking about AI that we're doing that means they don't have to do.
Yeah.
They don't have to do all of it. So not being part of a group like that disadvantages you, I think. And I think that's the kind of that can compound, and you can get further and further behind. And again, it's local leaders that understand that actually you don't have to fix everything,
Yeah.
and having the time to realise there is good stuff out there that you could be part of. That is it's a problem.
Absolutely. Are you going to inject, or is the LGD team going to inject AI into LocalGov Drupal?
We're looking at it. The nice thing about being part of the Drupal community is we don't have to do all this thinking from scratch.
Yeah.
So Drupal enthusiasts will know there's Starshot or CMS, Drupal CMS, that's doing an enormous amount of thinking about this.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we're going to leave us some of that, actually.
Sure.
And they're all content people. They want to publish.
Yeah.
We want to publish. So more often than not, the things that they find they're applicable in some way to what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look at that first and see what we can use.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Listen, let's wrap up. I want to ask you basically if you can sort of do some crystal ball gazing sort of stuff. 2025, 2026. What's kind of the perfect world if everything comes into play correctly from either AI, automation, new digital transformation for local government? What would be the best outcome for local government in 25, 26?
I think a lot is riding on DSIP and the conversation about the digital centre that are ongoing. What would be the best outcome? I think it's an understand. We've blogged about this. I can, if there's some notes, we can sort of put that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's an understanding that government can do the things it does, probably more than it's doing right now. But they don't have to do everything. So there shouldn't be an imposition of stuff from there onto here, onto local government, because there are a lot of people who are active, engaged in local gov that are very close to the chalk face that can deliver. So it's a meeting of minds really needs to happen. I think what happens with Devo and funding is going to play a massive part. We'll maybe see in the next 12 months how that shakes out, or start of that.
Yeah.
So councils have no money and no ability to plan. So will longer settlement times, going from a year to 3 years or to a whole parliament, will that make a difference? I mean, my skeptical thought is that having not enough money over 4 years is not much better than having not enough money over a year. It's actually not enough money to really do the job.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that pans out. But hopefully, I'm a big fan of constraints up to a point. If I've got to work in with constraints, with less money, with less time, actually I'll be a bit more creative about the things I do. And it's no surprise really that local Drupal happened during a pandemic. It's in a time of austerity.
Absolutely.
I think you can get good things happening in this time. We shouldn't be completely despairing.
Yeah, I mean, arguably technology is constantly about doing more with less.
Yeah.
And and actually that does ultimately benefit those who are resource constrained, like local government.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's trying to. I think it's just trying to rework what we have. We're all doing too much work. We could share that out.
Yeah.
Government could do some.
Yeah.
Could do some of the heavy lifting for us. There are really interesting conversations about, should every local council deliver every service?
Yeah.
I want to see how that shakes out,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
my gut feeling is that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And there's a sovereignty question about that. We could work through that.
Yeah.
But, we think about the tiers, the most appropriate tiers to do particular things. Could save everybody a lot of time and money and deliver better services overall. So I want to see where these things go.
Brilliant. Will, lovely to see you again. Will
Thank you,
Callaghan,
Paul.
thank you for joining us on Think Tank.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.